Most people think peace comes after life finally quiets down. But what if it's the other way around? What if life softens only after we do? There's a kind of exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix, the kind that comes from carrying noise inside long after the world has gone silent. Maybe you've felt it too, that subtle ache of being constantly on, even when no one is asking anything from you. This story begins in that familiar place, not with a crisis, but with a quiet realization that something gentle has been missing. And it offers a path back that doesn't require changing your life, only remembering a part of yourself you may have set aside. It might sound strange, but stillness isn't something you create. It's something you uncover, like a calm lake hidden beneath ripples. The man in this story didn't set out to transform. He only wanted a moment of relief from the endless hum in his chest. What he found instead was a way to return to himself in the middle of ordinary days, without escaping, without pretending. If you've ever wished for a pause that truly restores you, not just distracts you, you may recognize pieces of your own journey here. And somewhere along the way, you might begin to sense that the quiet you're searching for has been waiting patiently all along. He moved through his days as if the world were a crowded room that never emptied, voices stacking on top of voices until even his own thoughts sounded like strangers. Messages blinked, expectations tugged, memories replayed old criticisms at inconvenient hours. And somewhere in the middle of it all, he kept nodding as though he understood. Now and then he caught himself staring at nothing, feeling a faint homesickness for a quiet he couldn't quite remember. It was odd, he thought, to miss a place that wasn't exactly a place, more like a gentle pause he used to slip into without trying. Lately, even silence felt loud, as if the noise had learned how to echo inside his chest. At night he would sit on the edge of his bed, shoes still on, too tired to move and too restless to rest, listening to the low hum of everything unfinished. He wondered when he had started living like a radio left between stations, all static and no song. There had been a time when evenings felt like exhaling, when he could watch the light fade without the urge to fill the space. Now the quiet made him uneasy, like a question he didn't know how to answer. So he reached for distractions the way a chilled person reaches for a thin jacket, knowing it wouldn't really warm him. People around him said he was doing fine, which somehow made the heaviness lonelier, as if calm were a performance he couldn't stop giving. He smiled at the right moments, agreed when expected, carried on conversations while a small part of him kept scanning for an exit. Every so often a careless remark or a distant look from someone he trusted would linger far longer than it should, replaying in the background. He told himself to shake it off, yet the words settled like dust on a shelf no one cleaned. And beneath it all lived a quiet wish to feel steady again, not impressive, not strong, just settled. Once, while waiting at a crosswalk, he noticed how everyone around him reached for their phones. The instant stillness appeared, as if silence were something to outrun. He almost laughed, softly, realizing he was doing the same, thumb hovering before he even decided why. What would happen, he wondered, if he simply stood there and let the moment be empty? The idea felt both comforting and strangely risky, like stepping into water without knowing the temperature. Before the light changed, he caught a glimpse of a calmer version of himself standing somewhere just out of reach. Walking on, he couldn't tell if stillness was something he had misplaced along the way, or something patiently waiting for him to notice. The thought followed him like a faint melody he couldn't quite hum back. Maybe the quiet hadn't disappeared at all. Maybe it was just buried under layers he'd never paused long enough to set down. He felt, for the first time in a while, not relief exactly, but a small opening, like a window nudged loose after years of being stuck. And without fully understanding why, he slowed his pace, as though someone ahead of him had begun to walk differently. In the days that followed, he began noticing small pockets of quiet the way a thirsty person starts noticing fountains, unsure if they're meant for him. A minute before a meeting started, the hush of an elevator ride, the soft pause after someone finished speaking. They were brief, almost shy. Normally he would rush to fill them, but now he lingered, just to see what might happen if he didn't. Nothing dramatic occurred, no sudden clarity, just a subtle easing, like loosening a collar he hadn't realized was tight. It left him wondering if calm had less to do with changing life and more to do with stepping back from it. One evening he sat by his window and did something unusual for him. Absolutely nothing. At first his mind protested, tossing reminders and unfinished conversations at him like impatient notes slid under a door. He almost stood up, then remembered that faint opening he'd felt days earlier and stayed put. breathing as if relearning a forgotten language. Gradually, the urgency softened. Not gone, just less convincing, like waves losing force before reaching the shore. In that quiet, he sensed a fragile balance returning, the kind that doesn't announce itself. He started to suspect that stillness wasn't an empty space to be feared, but a kind of ground beneath the noise, steady and patient. It didn't demand anything from him, didn't judge how long he'd been away, simply held its place, as if it had always expected his return. There was comfort in that thought, a gentle permission to stop trying so hard to fix everything at once. When he paused, truly paused, the tangled feelings inside him didn't vanish, yet they stopped pulling him in every direction. For the first time in months, he felt the difference between being overwhelmed and simply being present. He tested it in small ways, like taking one slow breath before answering a message that carried a sharp edge. Instead of reacting, he let the breath finish, noticing the way his shoulders lowered a fraction on their own. The reply he sent was shorter, calmer, almost surprising in its simplicity, and the world didn't collapse because of it. It dawned on him that patience wasn't passivity. It was space, a buffer where clarity could quietly assemble itself. And oddly enough, that space felt more powerful than all his previous urgency combined. So he began carrying these pauses with him like invisible stepping stones, unsure where they led but trusting the direction. Each moment of stillness seemed to tune something inside him, subtle as adjusting a string you didn't know was out of pitch. He couldn't explain it yet, only sensed that harmony might return not through effort, but through these deliberate retreats into quiet. Somewhere ahead, he felt, there would be a reason this mattered, a person or moment that would show him how far he'd drifted. And without realizing it, he found himself hoping to meet someone who already knew how to live this way. By the time morning routines resumed their familiar rush, it was clear how easily the world could drown those fragile pauses he'd been collecting. He moved quickly, answered questions before they were fully asked, laughed a little too fast at jokes that didn't land. Silence still unsettled him, because when it lingered, it nudged open drawers he preferred to keep closed. Old disappointments, a sharp rejection he never quite digested, the memory of words thrown carelessly during an argument, they waited there. So he stayed busy, not out of ambition, but because motion felt safer than meeting what was still. Friends admired his energy, unaware that it was stitched together from equal parts exhaustion and avoidance. When someone said, "You're always so strong," he smiled politely, wondering when strength had started to feel like a costume. He feared that if he slowed down too much, everything he'd outrun would catch up at once. Even moments meant to be peaceful, a quiet cafe, a walk at dusk, carried a faint tension, like sitting in a room where a difficult conversation once happened. Still, beneath the unease was a soft, persistent wish to feel centered again, the way he imagined other people must feel without trying. One afternoon, a minor criticism from a colleague lingered far longer than it should have, replaying as he walked home. He knew it wasn't a big thing, yet it tapped into a deeper bruise, and suddenly the noise inside him surged back to full volume. By the time he reached his door, he felt both angry and oddly hollow, as if the reaction had drained more than the moment deserved. He leaned against the wall, eyes closed, wishing for a switch that could dim the intensity. Instead, he stood there listening to his own breathing, uneven but honest. That night he admitted something to himself he'd avoided for years. He wasn't afraid of noise. He was afraid of what silence revealed. Without distractions, he could feel how scattered he'd become, like a compass spinning without settling on north. The realization didn't fix anything, yet it softened his resistance just enough to let a different thought in. Maybe peace wasn't about controlling the storm, but learning how to sit quietly while it passed. He wasn't sure he believed it, though part of him wanted to. As he drifted toward sleep, he imagined what it might feel like to wake without the usual rush already humming in his chest. The idea felt distant but not impossible, like remembering a melody from childhood you could almost hum. Somewhere in that half-dream, he sensed that his path was about to cross with someone who treated quiet, not as an absence, but as a companion. He didn't know who or how, only that the thought settled him more than any distraction had. And for the first time, he didn't reach for noise to fill the dark. A few days later, while wandering through a narrow street he didn't usually take, he heard a faint, uneven melody drifting from a small repair shop. Curiosity slowed his steps, and through the window he noticed an old violin resting on a wooden counter, its strings slightly slack. The sound it produced wasn't unpleasant, just uncertain, like a voice that had forgotten the words halfway through a song. Something about it tugged at him, a quiet recognition he couldn't explain. He lingered outside longer than necessary, listening as if the instrument were trying to tell his story for him. The shopkeeper, unaware of his audience, gently turned one of the tuning pegs, then paused, letting the note fade before adjusting again. There was no rush in the movement, only patience, as though forcing the sound would only push it further away. He noticed how the violin seemed almost to resist at first, the pitch wavering before settling into something clearer. It reminded him of how he felt when someone asked if he was okay, and he didn't know which answer was honest. For a moment he imagined what it would be like to be handled with that same careful attention. He stepped inside without planning to, drawn by the quiet ritual unfolding before him. Up close, the violin looked worn but dignified, its surface marked by years of being held, played, perhaps even neglected. The shopkeeper nodded politely, then returned to listening rather than speaking, as if the silence between notes mattered most. He found himself holding his breath each time a string was plucked, waiting for the moment it would stop trembling. It felt strangely intimate, witnessing something come back into harmony, one small turn at a time. When the shopkeeper finally spoke, it was only to say, almost to himself, "It's not broken, just unsettled." The words landed softly, yet they echoed in a place he hadn't known was listening. Unsettled, not ruined, not beyond repair, just temporarily out of tune. He repeated the phrase inwardly, testing how it fit against the story he'd been telling himself for so long. For once, the idea of being fixable didn't feel like pressure, more like relief. As he left the shop, the newly tuned note followed him into the street, clear and steady against the hum of traffic. He walked slower than usual, carrying the sound as if it might fade if he moved too quickly. Something inside him had shifted, subtle but undeniable, like a string gently tightened after years of slack. He didn't know yet what to do with the feeling, only that he didn't want to lose it. And somewhere ahead, he sensed, there might be someone who understood exactly why that fragile harmony mattered. He returned to the little shop a few days later, pretending he was just passing by, though his steps slowed long before he reached the door. Inside, the same violin rested on the counter, and beside it stood an older man he hadn't noticed before, polishing the wood with unhurried care. The man didn't greet him right away, only nodded and continued working, as if silence were the most natural welcome. It felt oddly comfortable, not having to perform politeness or fill the air with small talk. So he stood there, hands in his pockets, listening to the quiet as if it were a language he was beginning to understand. After a while, the man set the cloth aside and gently plucked a string, then waited, eyes half closed, letting the sound dissolve on its own. He noticed how there was no impatience in the pause, no urge to rush toward the next action. Most people he knew spoke quickly, moved quickly, lived as though chased by something unseen. This man seemed anchored to the present in a way that made time feel softer around the edges. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and warm, like someone who trusted silence to do most of the work. "Noise makes us think something is happening," the man said, almost casually, adjusting a peg by a fraction. "But harmony begins when we stop adding more to it." The words weren't delivered as advice, just an observation offered to the room, yet they settled heavily in his chest. He realized how often he had tried to out-talk his discomfort, to outwork his unease, to outpace his own thoughts. Standing there, he wondered what would happen if he simply stopped interfering. The man handed him the violin without ceremony, as though passing a cup of tea, trusting he would know what to do. He hesitated, then held it awkwardly, surprised by its warmth, as if it had been waiting for human hands. "Just listen," the man murmured, not instructing him to play, only to notice the faint vibration still lingering in the wood. He closed his eyes for a second, feeling the subtle hum against his fingers, steady and alive. It was the quietest sound he'd ever paid attention to, and somehow the most grounding. When he opened his eyes, the man was watching him with a gentle expression that felt more like recognition than curiosity. No probing questions, no analysis, just a calm presence that made it safe to stand exactly as he was. He sensed that this was someone who had made peace with silence long ago, someone who no longer feared what it revealed. For the first time, he didn't feel the urge to explain himself or pretend he had everything under control. And as he handed the violin back, he had the unmistakable feeling that this meeting was only the beginning of something he didn't yet have words for. Many of the stories you hear here aren't just stories. They reflect the invisible weight you may be carrying every day. If you're tired of holding pain, responsibility, and guilt that were never yours, I created an ebook called The Weight of Stones That Are Not Yours and More 2 Bonus for you. It's for those who want to let go, set boundaries, and live with more lightness. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. The next time he visited, the older man was seated by the window, the violin resting across his lap as if it had chosen to be there. He gestured for him to sit without a word, then closed his eyes, not in dismissal but in invitation. At first he felt unsure what was expected, hands fidgeting, mind already searching for something useful to say. But the man simply breathed, slow and steady, as though time had loosened its grip on him. Reluctantly, he matched the rhythm, discovering how unfamiliar unhurried breathing had become. After a while, the man placed the violin on the table between them and lightly touched one string, setting it into a soft vibration. He didn't adjust it, didn't rush to correct the pitch, only waited, watching the movement fade on its own. Most people try to fix the sound while it's still trembling, he said gently. They don't trust that it knows how to settle. The idea felt strangely personal, as if the lesson had been meant for him long before he arrived. He thought of all the times he had forced himself to move on before understanding what he felt, rushing to appear fine. Sitting there, he allowed a recent hurt to surface, a harsh comment, a look of disappointment, without pushing it away. It pulsed through him at first, uncomfortable and raw, then gradually softened, like a bruise no longer being pressed. Nothing dramatic happened, no sudden insight, just a quiet easing that spread through his chest. He realized he had spent years interrupting his own healing. The man nodded slightly, as if he could sense the shift without needing it explained. Harmony returns when we stop pulling against our own rhythm, he said, adjusting the peg only after the string was still. The note that followed was clear, effortless, as though it had been waiting for permission rather than correction. He felt something inside him mirror that change, a subtle alignment he couldn't quite name. For once, patience didn't feel like delay. It felt like cooperation with something wiser than his urgency. When he stepped back into the street, the city sounded different, not quieter, just less invasive. He paused before crossing, letting the noise pass through him without grabbing onto it. A single slow breath steadied him more than any distraction had before. It occurred to him that stillness wasn't something the man had given him, but something he had shown him how to allow. And as he walked on, he sensed that this small discovery was about to change the way he moved through even the most ordinary moments. He didn't transform overnight, of course. The old habits still tugged at him like familiar shortcuts through a crowded city. Yet now and then he caught himself pausing before reacting, as if remembering a quiet instruction spoken just beneath the noise. When irritation flared, a sharp email, a dismissive glance, he placed a hand lightly over his chest and took one slow breath. It felt almost too simple to matter, but the moment stretched just enough for the urgency to loosen its grip. In that space, he noticed he had choices he'd never seen while rushing. Mornings changed first, subtly, like light entering a room through a curtain not fully closed. Instead of reaching for his phone the instant he woke, he sat up and listened to the quiet hum of the day not yet begun. Sometimes his thoughts still charged in, demanding attention, but he treated them like passing traffic rather than emergencies. On particularly restless days, he imagined the violin string settling, its vibration fading into clarity. The image steadied him, a reminder that calm could be practiced in seconds, not earned through struggle. People began noticing something different, though they couldn't quite name it. He spoke a little slower, laughed more easily, no longer filling every pause with explanations. When someone snapped at him during a tense moment, he didn't absorb it the way he once would have. He let the words land, breathe, and drift away, like sound dissolving in open air. Oddly, his quiet response softened the other person too, as if calm were contagious. Evenings became a kind of gentle return rather than a collapse from exhaustion. He kept a small notebook by his bed and wrote one honest sentence each night, nothing elaborate, just the truth of the day. Some nights it was gratitude, other nights a confession of how tired he still felt, but the act itself settled him. It was like placing the violin carefully back in its case, acknowledging it had been played, even if imperfectly. Sleep came easier when he stopped arguing with the day that had already ended. Weeks passed, and the sense of being perpetually off balance began to fade into memory. He still had difficult moments, of course. but they no longer defined the entire landscape of his inner world. Sometimes he caught himself walking without the usual rush, aware of the rhythm of his steps, steady and unforced. The harmony he'd glimpsed in that little shop was no longer something external. It had begun to live quietly within him, and he had a feeling life was about to test whether that fragile balance would hold beyond the safety of solitude. The test arrived on an ordinary afternoon, disguised as a moment he would once have replayed for days. A colleague's sharp remark, delivered in front of others, landed with the familiar sting of embarrassment. He felt the old surge rising, the heat in his chest, the rehearsed defenses lining up, but something in him paused. Almost automatically, he took one slow breath, as if his body remembered before his mind did. In that brief stillness, the words lost some of their weight, like a note fading before it could turn harsh. He answered simply, without the usual edge, his voice steady enough to surprise even himself. The room shifted, tension loosening as though everyone had been waiting for permission to exhale. What could have become a spiral of resentment ended as just another passing exchange. He returned to his work with a quiet focus, noticing how calm created space where chaos used to spread. It wasn't that he had won anything, he had just refused to join the noise. Later, stuck in traffic with horns blaring around him, he rested his hands lightly on the steering wheel. Instead of tightening, he imagined the violin string again, settling into its true note despite the surrounding clamor. He let the sounds pass through him, neither resisting nor absorbing them, just acknowledging their presence. To his surprise, the irritation dissolved into a strange neutrality, almost a quiet companionship with the moment. He realized peace wasn't found by escaping life but by standing gently within it. At home, a message awaited him, a misunderstanding from someone he cared about, words tinged with disappointment. He felt the ache of it, honest and immediate, yet he didn't rush to fix or defend. He placed the phone down, breathed once, twice, letting the emotion move through without hardening. When he finally replied, the words came from a steadier place, simple and sincere. The conversation that followed carried less hurt than it might have, as if his calm had softened the path between them. That night, as he prepared for sleep, he noticed the quiet in the room felt different from the silence he once feared. It no longer pressed in on him. It held him, like a steady hand at his back. He understood now that harmony wasn't fragile after all, just easily forgotten when life grew loud. With each pause he practiced, the balance returned a little faster, a little more naturally, and somewhere deep down, he sensed that what he'd learned was meant to be shared, not through words alone, but through presence. Not long after, he found himself back in the small shop, the older man watching him with that same quiet attentiveness. "You don't need this place anymore," the man said gently, tapping the violin case, "but you might remember what it showed you." He nodded, unsure how to explain that the world outside still pulled at him in unpredictable ways. The man smiled, as if he understood the question that hadn't been spoken. "Then take 1 minute," he said, holding up a single finger, "and give it back to yourself." He demonstrated by closing his eyes, one hand resting lightly over his heart, breathing as though greeting an old friend. No ceremony, no complicated steps, just a quiet return to the body that had carried him through so much noise. He tried it too, awkward at first, aware of every stray thought knocking at the door of his attention. Instead of chasing them away, he imagined placing each one gently on a passing cloud, letting it drift without argument. To his surprise, the space inside him widened, as if a crowded room had slowly begun to empty. "Thoughts don't need to be solved immediately," the man murmured, eyes still closed. "They pass more easily when you stop inviting them to stay." He noticed how his shoulders softened, how his breathing settled into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar. It reminded him of the violin string again, vibrating less and less until only the clear note remained. For the first time, he understood that stillness could be practiced anywhere, even in the middle of a difficult day. Before he left, the man handed him a small object, not the violin, but one loose string coiled carefully in a tiny envelope. "A reminder," he said simply, as though no further explanation were needed. He slipped it into his pocket, feeling its lightness, wondering how something so small could carry so much meaning. Later, whenever tension crept in, he would touch the envelope briefly, pausing just long enough to breathe once with intention. It became a silent promise to himself, a way back to balance in under a minute. As he stepped outside, the air felt clearer, though nothing visible had changed. He realized that the practice wasn't about escaping noise, but about remembering where quiet lived within him. Anyone, he thought, could do this. Pause, breathe, allow, even in the middle of criticism or loneliness. The simplicity of it almost made him smile, a soft, private kind of relief. And he sensed that the real lesson was not in the minute itself, but in choosing to return to it again and again. Years later, people sometimes asked him what had changed, expecting a dramatic story or a secret technique he could hand over. He would smile gently, unsure how to explain that the shift had been quiet, almost invisible, like dawn arriving without announcement. Life still brought noise, disappointments, and the occasional sting of careless words, yet they no longer scattered him. He had learned to return, again and again, to the still place that had never truly left him. It wasn't effort that carried him there, only the willingness to pause when everything urged him to rush. He kept the coiled string in a small wooden box by his window, not as a relic, but as a reminder of what patience could restore. On difficult days, he would hold it between his fingers, feeling its gentle curve, breathing until his thoughts softened. The ritual took less than a minute, yet it reset something deeper than logic ever could. Harmony, he realized, wasn't built through force, but through these quiet returns to center. Each pause was like tuning a life that would naturally drift out of pitch from time to time. Friends noticed how his presence steadied a room, how conversations seemed to slow when he listened without rushing to reply. He didn't try to calm anyone, didn't offer clever advice, just gave them the same spacious attention he had learned to give himself. Often that was enough. People softened when they felt they didn't have to compete with noise. He understood now that peace travels silently, carried by those who cultivate it within. Without intending to, he had become the kind of person he once hoped to meet. Sometimes he would pass the old shop, now closed, and pause for a moment out of quiet gratitude. The street sounded the same, footsteps, distant traffic, fragments of conversation, yet it no longer overwhelmed him. He knew the difference wasn't outside, but in the way he stood within it, grounded and unhurried. Stillness had become less of a practice and more of a home he carried everywhere, and even in crowded places, he could feel that steady note humming softly beneath everything else. On certain evenings, when the light faded just so, he would sit by the window with nothing to do and nowhere to be. The quiet no longer felt like a question. It felt like an answer he didn't need to articulate. He would breathe, sensing the balance that had once seemed lost, now simply part of who he was. Anyone watching might have seen only a man resting after a long day, but within, harmony rested too, whole and patient, waiting for whoever remembered how to return to it.